Welcome, everyone. We'll just wait a minute to let everybody sign on for today's seminar before we get underway. Once again, welcome, everyone. We're looking forward to having you join us for today's seminar. We'll get started in just about a minute. We'll just be waiting a minute to let everybody sign on. Please, as you receive the permission, feel free to turn on your camera. And during the event, you'll be able to submit questions in the chat window. Okay, expect we'll have a few more join us, but welcome everyone. My name is Ira Guberman. I'm the manager of programming and operations here at ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. On Thursdays at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will have seminars from our Anti-Semitism in South Asia and Comparative Perspective seminar series. You can learn more about the series on isgap.org, our website. Once again, that's isgap.org. Today, we're honored to have Professor P.V. Viswanath with us. And this time, I'll hand off the event to our convener, Dr. Navras Aafreedi.
Thank you, Mr. Guberman. A very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Navras Aafreedi, Research Fellow at ISGAP, and we are very privileged to have with us Professor P.V. Viswanath for the fourth session of the webinar series, Anti-Semitism in South Asia in Comparative Perspective. We have a webinar every Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Professor P.V. Viswanath is Professor of Finance and Graduate Program Chair in the Finance Department at the Lubin School of Business, Pace University in New York City. He speaks around a dozen languages, including Tamil, Yiddish, French, German, Hebrew, Spanish, and Urdu. He is currently studying Sanskrit and Mandarin Chinese. His research is mainly in the area of corporate finance and microfinance. However, he also works in the intersection of religion, law, and economics. A recent publication examines the nature of gifts in an ancient Buddhist Vinaya text, while work in progress includes the economy of ancient India as reflected in the works of the medieval Indian poet Kalidas. sale and purchase contracts in ancient Hindu legal texts, and the nature of gifts described in the 11th century Cairo-Geniza correspondence among Jewish Indian ocean traders. Today, he will speak to us on anti-Semitism from Innocence. I would request you to post your questions in the comment box, and once the lecture is over, Professor Viswanath would be kind enough to take those questions. Thank you very much once again for joining us for today's session. Now I hand over the reins of the session to Professor Viswanath with a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Navras Aafreedi. I'm very pleased to be here. I want to thank the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy also. And all of those who are attending also, I want to thank you. I've known Dr. Aafreedi for more than a decade now, and I've a lot of admiration for him. Almost single-handedly, he's created the field of Jewish studies in India, and that's another reason I'm so happy to be part of this series that he's convening. So, about 14 or so years ago, in about 14 or so years ago, on the 25th of November in 2008, that was the eve of Thanksgiving in the United States. It was already the 26th of November in India. I was in my office and I got a call from CHABAD. What had happened was, as all of you know, in 2008, there was a terrorist attack on Mumbai, on Bombay, and these terrorists had taken over many locations in Bombay, and ultimately more than 150 people were killed, horrific incidents. But among the places that were occupied was CHABAD House in South Bombay, in Colaba. So this was a place where CHABAD operated from, and this place was also taken over, and the people in CHABAD here in New York were worried. So they tried calling the cell phone of the CHABAD emissary, the Shaliach, Rabbi Gabriel Holzberg. Nobody was picking up. And then all of a sudden somebody picked up, and it was a foreign person, somebody not belonging to CHABAD, somebody was speaking some other language that they didn't know. So they hunted around to see whether there would be somebody around who might be able to communicate with this person. And ultimately, I was contacted, and the upshot of it was that I ended up being the translator between Rabbi Levi Shem Tov of CHABAD here and one of the terrorists, Imran Babar, in CHABAD House in India. So in the 14 or so years since then, I've thought a lot about that incident. That was one of the closest and rawest encounters that I've ever had with anti-Semitism, and this was anti-Semitism with a South Asian face. And I've thought about it, and I've tried to understand what causes people to act with such hate. And particularly in India, in Pakistan, South Asians, people who are very close to me, my compatriots, as it were, whichever country they might belong to, we share a culture. So what causes this kind of hate? And when Dr. Aafreedi asked me to speak about it, I thought even more about it. And I decided that it would not be incorrect to think about it as anti-Semitism from innocence, and hence the reason for my title of the talk today. And let me explain what I mean by this. So in the English dictionary, innocent has many meanings. The word innocent has many meanings. One of it is innocent of, which means without experience or knowledge of. Another meaning for innocent is not intended to cause harm or offense. So in my knowledge, most South Asians, even if they have anti-Semitic leanings, they're innocent in the sense that they don't really have true knowledge or experience of Judaism. Sometimes of Jews, they might not even have met a single Jew. And this is true of Hindus and Christians in South Asia. And in the case of Muslim South Asians, this is also true in the sense that they're often ignorant, but often they also have this kind of misguided knowledge, and this knowledge is often provided by outsiders, sometimes community leaders with their own agenda. So in a sense, they too are innocent because the knowledge that they have is not really the right kind of knowledge. And I would claim that, perhaps one could even say that they're innocent in the second sense, in that they don't intend to cause harm or offense. Of course, I'm not saying that, their false knowledge or lack of knowledge which impels their anti-Semitism does not cause harm. It does in reality. But because these actions are fueled by misconceptions, so in a certain sense, they lack real intent to cause harm. And that's why I think of this sentence, anti-Semitism as anti-Semitism from innocence. And this, it's not just a question of naming. But what I want to argue is that because this is the kind of anti-Semitism we are talking about, our analysis and our reaction and our suggestions for solutions have to be different. Okay, so, it's almost a trope that in India is one of the few countries where there has not been an anti-Semitism. And as Dr. Aafreedi mentioned, my area of study is not Judaism or sociology or history or anything of that sort. I'm an economist. I study finance primarily, but I do read widely, and I've also published a little bit, even in history. So, in all my studies and in my readings, my conclusion is that, in fact, it is true that anti-Semitism has not been a problem in India. But more recently, like in the 20th century, and a lot of people have written about this, Julia Grova has written about it, Dr. Aafreedi has also written about it. There were Hindu nationalists who began to see non-Hindus, now this including Jews, often the targets were Muslim, but particularly Jews also, they saw them as outsiders. The Hindu Mahasabha, Savarkar, there were others as well who openly supported Nazism, and they talked about Germany's crusade against enemies of Aryan culture, meaning referring to Jews. So there has been anti-Semitism from the Hindu side in India for about a century now. More recently, because of geopolitical alliances, it's changed a little bit of its face, but it's still there. And I'll speak a little about it slightly in a little later. And it's not just right-wing people. There are a lot of ordinary education, sometimes even educated Indians who have absorbed anti-Semitism almost casually from reading Western authors and contacts with Westerners. We know the model of Shylock. When I was growing up, it's probably not incorrect to say that one of my first knowledge of who Jews are was the model of Shylock and Shakespeare. And, a lot of people still think of Shylock when they think of Jews. Shylock was a miser and a misanthrope, And a lot of Indians also, through talking to other Westerners who themselves have various kinds of anti-Semitic tendencies, they absorb these tendencies. So that's the on the Hindu side. Now on the Muslim side, as I was saying, there are many religious leaders who've developed theological anti-Jewish arguments. And again, I'm taking a lot of this from Professor Aafreedi's work, Abdullah Maududi, Said Abdul Hassan Ali Hassani Nadwi, more recently Zakir Naik, and others. And he mentions this very interesting case of a recent politician, Asif Muhammad Khan, who actually was a congressperson, and he attacks this Aam Aadmi Party candidate as being Jewish. I mean, we're talking about Delhi, there's hardly any Jews around. Anyway, so you see, these things are still going on. And the Urdu press, and this has been documented quite a bit, has fueled these fires. And Professor Aafreedi writes, the anti-Jewish posture of the Muslim press negatively affects Indian Muslim perceptions of Jews in general. Then again, he writes, Muslims in Lucknow have no direct contact with Jews because of the complete absence of Jews in the city and the small numbers in South Asia in general. So what I'm saying is, there is all this negative information, partly theologically based by Muslim leaders, partly fanned by the Muslim press. So ordinary Muslims get their information about Jews from this kind of source. And this kind of false knowledge, sometimes ideas propagated with all kinds of other agendas. And so what are we supposed to do about this? So Professor Aafreedi writes, hatred thrives on falsehood. Only way to fight it is by eliminating ignorance and raising awareness. So I'm going to suggest I agree with him, I don't disagree with him, but I'm going to suggest that, given the fact that anti-Semitism, at least in the Muslim community in South Asia, is quite ingrained and widespread, we need a different kind of approach. So I'm going to suggest that we need a more direct connection of people with people. So Ashutosh Varshney, this is a sociologist whose ideas I'm going to be talking about mainly today. He studied Hindu-Muslim violence to analyze why in some places there is violence and in other places there is not. So he looked at pairs of cities. It's actually a very wonderful book. I would recommend that any of you read any of his work that you have available to you. So he paired cities, Surat and Ahmedabad, Calicut and Aligarh. In Aligarh, there is violence between Hindus and Muslims. Calicut, there's a lot less. Lucknow and Hyderabad, again, Lucknow, there is less compared to Hyderabad. And his conclusion was that we need interethnic networks because they build bridges and manage tensions. So he talks about two different kinds of networks. We'll talk about that in a second, but I just want, before that, I'm going to say that, as I mentioned before, the violence that we are talking about is real. So it's not just on the theoretical front. Okay. But that being said, it's not quite comparable to the Hindu-Muslim violence that occurs in India. So we can't take Varshney's conclusions wholesale. We can't apply them wholesale. We can't take them as they are. But they can be used to create our own solutions to this issue of anti-Semitism in South Asia. So as I was mentioning earlier, he says there are two kinds of interethnic networks. You have the regular, everyday, quotidian networks where people meet each other, eat with each other, they jointly participate in festivals, which in India is very, very important. And then you have organized forms of engagement, business associations, reading clubs, film clubs, trade unions, all these sorts of things. So he says that, if you rely simply on personal contacts, you'll need a lot of contacts, and the number of contacts that you need increases exponentially with the number of people involved. On the other hand, if you have associations, so these associations bring people together in a much more efficient way. And what he says is that, and he argues, and I believe I accept his arguments, which is and his arguments are supported by evidence, at least in the Hindu-Muslim case. These inter-ethnic associations. So we need associations that cut across ethnic communities. So in this case, cut across Muslim and Jewish communities. Well, I'll talk about who the communities are in a second. But for now, let's assume that they are Indian Jewish communities, which in the present situation mainly refers to BENE Israel. So these associations can build trust, encourage reciprocity, and people will talk to each other. And effectively, what he says, and the ITAL parts are taken from his own words, Varshneys' own words. He says what happens is that even if there are people from the outside, even the politicians want to create problems, right? But the existence of these inter-ethnic associations, that creates countervailing forces, and people are talking to each other. People have interests that are shared. Nobody really wants violence, and this creates a force on the ground that combats the people from the outside, whether it be the press or politicians who want to separate the communities and foment tension and generate violence. So that's his point. So now coming to the Jewish analysis. So in 1882, and since 1882, we are talking this particular incident, and we are more than a century away from there. But it's an example of what could happen. In 1882, there was a blood libel printed in a local Muslim publication, and a community representative asked the publisher of this publication to apologize, and the editor has actually apologized. So I think what probably happened there was that the existence of organizations between Jews and Muslims that already existed. I mean, these organizations were already there that enabled these people to talk to each other and to calm down the situation. It didn't it didn't result in a pogrom of the kind that happened so many times in Europe. Now, in Mumbai, Thane, and Pune, there are Jewish communities. Now there are BENE Israel communities. And I know that, individuals in these communities do talk to other people. I have friends in the communities, in the BENE Israel community, that I've talked to over time about this. Sharon Galsurkar, Ezra Moses, Raymond Ramrajkar, a lot of other people. I don't have time to name all of them, but I know that they are rooted in the larger community. I don't just mean the Jewish community. They are rooted in the larger community. They speak local languages. They are they talk with politicians. They talk with other people in the neighborhood, Muslim, Hindus, everybody. So there are these inter-ethnic relationships, but I think a lot of them are what Varshni describes as quotidian networks. I think, if possible, I understand the Jewish community in India is kind of small, but it would be great if there were some kind of more formal relationship more formal association between the BENE Israel community and other parts of the local community, some kind of a community outreach program. As I said before, South Asian people in South Asia often don't know who Jews are. So an explanation of who Jews are from local people would get a much better reception than a Western explanation. When I was a few years ago, I was in Bhubaneswar, and I took the opportunity to actually, I was invited, so I was fortunate that way. I gave a talk in the local museum about who Jews are. So I think these sorts of things, in addition to formal interethnic networks, are going to be very, very useful. So in addition to that, what can we do? Because the number of Jews in India is not very large, and we can't really do the same sort of thing that Varshney is suggesting happen between Hindus and Muslims. But there are organizations like Chabad, and I'll talk more about them in a second. There are also floating populations of Israelis, Western Jews, and Philo-Semites. And I think it's possible, and I'll talk a little bit more about these groups as well. And I think it's possible for each of these groups to do something to increase knowledge, true knowledge about who Jews are and what they stand for. Many of us visit India, and I mean, I have never visited Pakistan, unfortunately, but some of you, probably Americans, probably visit Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. So you have a role to play as well. In addition, there are groups, and I'll mention Kulanu. This is a group that works mainly with people all over the world, but also in South Asia, groups of people who want to become Jews, or they want to have some kind of a Jewish connection. There are these groups that are referred to as Noahide, BENE Noah. These are individuals and groups who want to follow Jewish practices, or they want to follow at least what are called the 7 commandments to non-Jews, the 7 Talmudic commandments. Some of them want to convert. There are many other people who are well-wishers of Jews, and I'm in contact with a lot of them. Currently, they lack a voice. They are individuals. I think it is possible to harness them in groups, in communities, and actively counteract false information there is out there about Jews. In addition to this, and Navras Aafreedi has pointed this out, there are South Asian Muslim communities, not just in India, but also in the diaspora. In the UK, they form 3% of the total British population, which is huge. In the US, South Asians are very important. In my own township in Teaneck, the local synagogue is mostly composed of South Asians. And their attitudes can have a big impact on Muslims in South Asia. So I would suggest that we in the diaspora, Indian Jews, but also others, also should consider reaching out to South Asian Muslims. And I think the payback, the payoff can be huge. I want to say a little bit about Chabad. So 15, 16 years ago, Chabad in India, their mission was primarily to Jews. They didn't really have too much to do with, even with local Jews, and certainly not much with non-Jews. But already as far back as Rabbi Holzberg, that model changed. He was very outgoing. He talked to a lot of people who in the larger Indian community. And since then, Rabbi Kozlovsky has continued in the same path as well. So after 11/26, there were plans that were developed for a museum to commemorate Rabbi Holzberg and his wife Rivka. And this museum is actually now open. So this photograph that you're seeing here was taken on the occasion of the opening of this museum. And right next to me is Rabbi Holzberg's father. And this museum is supposed to commemorate Rabbi Holzberg and his wife Rivka, but also it's also dedicated to spreading knowledge about the 7 commandments that the Talmud teaches to non-Jews. So this is a photograph of Rabbi Kozlovsky, the present Chabad emissary. There's a group of Indian kids here who are visiting the museum not long ago. And there's the website as well. In addition, about 4 or 5 years ago, in 2016 actually, so Chabad approached me and said that they wanted to create a website in local languages that would explain Judaism to non-Jews. Of course, they're talking about Chabad Judaism, so it's not exactly everybody's Judaism, but still. So I worked with them. I mean, I didn't do the translation, even though I do know Hindi, Urdu, but my language knowledge is not good enough to actually undertake this kind of translation. So we worked with professional translators, and this is the outcome. So you see the website here. You can, I'll be happy to put the link to it in the chat later on. That's available. And here's a sample page where they talk about Yehudi kaun hai, who are the Jews, etc., etc. So the various pages there. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing that I want to talk about is that anti-Semitism and inter-ethnic conflicts, they occur also because of identity issues. So he says that conflicts are driven by issues of resources, identity, patronage, and policies. So these other things, resources, etc., are not really any more relevant in the Indian context. But identity is, right? And I think part of the problem in India is that the identity of Muslims is tied to the connection with Islam, Arabs, the Palestinian issue. And then so there's automatically this notion that, whoever is against Palestinians, whoever is against my brother is against me. And therefore I'm against you. So as long as Indian Muslims feel that that is an overwhelming part of their identity, I think that there's a greater likelihood of Indian Muslim anti-Semitism. And I know that there is a trope in India, a false trope about, Muslims having allegiance outside India, is similar to the trope that we're familiar with that's leveled against the charge leveled against Jews, that their allegiance is to Israel first. So I'm not referring to that, but I'm just saying that it is important for individuals to recognize that they have multiple identities. So for Muslims, it would be this notion that they're also Indian. Similarly, Indian Jews, if they see themselves mainly as having a connection to Israel first and Indian second, being Indian second, that is also going to play into the same kind of politics. So again, I'm not saying that Indian Jews need to reject their bonds to the state of Israel. I'm not saying that Indian Muslims should say, oh, we have nothing to do with Arabs, or we have nothing to do with Palestinians. That's not true. And they don't need to do that. But the point is that everybody has multiple sources of identity. And Indians too have multiple sources of identity. And if anything, I would claim, and I'm saying this from personal experience, Indians, I think, exhibit this phenomenon to a much greater extent than others. Indians in metropolitan areas, certainly. So the languages that they speak. So I have something in common with people who speak Tamil or Hindi, wherever they might be, whether they are Muslims or Christians. So I have every week, I read Tamil with a friend of mine, and he happens to be a Tamil Christian, right? But the fact that we speak Tamil, that binds us. Where we live, if I see somebody else who's a Mumbaikar, right? So it's already a link between us. The religion that you follow, the caste you belong to. I know caste in India has been used for negative purposes, but caste in the sense of jati, right? In the sense that, you have a relationship with somebody else automatically, wherever they might be, that creates a link between you, right? The school that you attend, all these sorts of identities you have. And I just want to cite this one interesting thing. So Lisa Mitchell, she's a scholar. I think she's at UPenn. She writes about the language problem. She's knowledgeable mostly about the case of Telugu nationalism, but she writes in one of her books about language identity at the beginning of the 19th century. And she says, you know, somebody in southern India, presumably this would have been in Chennai or someplace like that, so might find it perfectly natural to, in the same day, compose an official letter in Persian, record a land transaction in Marathi, send a personal note to a relative in Telugu, perform religious ablutions in Sanskrit, barter with a village vegetable vendor in Tamil. All this simultaneously in one day. In other words, this person didn't think of himself or herself as being, you know, a Teluguite or a Tamilian, but these are all things that these languages were languages that he or she used in a functional sense. So this person was simultaneously a Persian speaker and a Marathi speaker and a Telugu speaker and a Sanskrit speaker. So similarly, I think we can also all have all these multiple identities. So I myself, I am an economist. I belong to the community of economists. I'm Jewish. I belong to the community of Jews. I speak Yiddish, so I belong to the community of Ashkenazim. I daven, I pray in a Sephardi minyan on Shabbat. I speak Tamil, so I'm part of the Tamilian group. I'm an Indian, and now I'm part of a community at Pace University where I teach. I'm part of a group called Persons of Color. I'm also part of another group that works on Asians and Pacific Islander identity. So I belong to all these groups simultaneously. So I want to relate this very interesting incident once. I lived next door to New York City. So I was in the subway and, you know, so I was wearing yarmulke, kippah that I usually wear. I have a beard, as you can see. So this is South Asian Muslim comes in and, you know, so we exchanged some words, you know, I said, Salam alaikum to him, and he got off. And the very next station, an Orthodox Jew got in, and then, you know, he told me, Shalom Aleichem. So within like 5 minutes, I was exchanging the same greeting with two people from two different communities. And that was possible for me because I belong to both communities simultaneously. And this is the case for a lot of us. And I think we should recognize it and be proud about it and actually develop it. So when people have multiple sources of identity, there's a greater chance that you can connect with other people. And this reinforces Varshneys' notion of associational forms of civic engagement. So I think that Jews also have to think about this. And I know historically, Jews have, you know, because of their experience in Eastern Europe, they tended to think of themselves as being separate from others. They walled themselves off, and non-Jews often are thought of as being second class or secondary. So in this context, I want to cite what the Kotzker Rebbe, who was a 19th century mystic, said. He said, if I am me because I am me, and you are you because you are you, then I am me and you are you. But if I am me because you are you and you are you because I am me, then I'm not even me and you're not you, because my identity comes from pushing you away, right? So he's focusing on the importance of thinking of identity as positive. And so I think we should look at our ethnic and religious identities in this positive way. We can be who we are without denying the right of the other to be who she or he is. And this, I think, is important if we are going to make connections with other people, if we are going to address the issue of hatred between people, if we are going to address the issue of anti-Semitism in South Asia. And I won't spend too much time on this because already we are running out of time. I want to mention also the notion how people in South Asia relate to religion, relate to God. And I think, in my experience, this is something that cuts across religions in India. And it goes by various names. In Hebrew, it would be Tvekut. In Sanskrit, it would be Bhakti. And in Islam, for Sufis, this would be Tasawwuf. Tasawwuf is a difficult word, but I think part of the meaning of this word Tasawwuf is what you see in Bhakti as well. That is people who have a personal relationship with God, right? And in Islam, it's a little bit more difficult because of theological considerations, but you can see this in the Shia Islam attachment to Prophet Ali's family. And even in Sunni Islam, there's a reverence towards Muhammad. So that is, all these sorts of ideas emphasize this feeling in people that, their religion, the religion that they practice, not simply a set of rituals, but it is something deeper. And this thing that is deep relates them, connects them to God. But I want to argue that this connection to God is meaningful only if it simultaneously means a connection to those who are around you. So Sheikh Sadi of Shiraz said the essence of tariqah is not to be found in the rosary or the prayer rug or the Sufi cloak. It's a service to God's creatures in which you will find its true meaning manifest, right? So he's focusing on God's creatures. If you want to have connection with God, you need to also think about God's creatures. Kabir, people who are from India know about Kabir. He has written a lot about this notion that a relationship with God is not specific to a particular religion, right? So he says the Lord of the Hindus and the Turks is one and the same. Why become a mullah? Why become a sheikh? It doesn't matter. All the religions, he says, are talking about God. And I'd like to conclude with another composition of Kabir, where it says, "Moko kahan dhoonde re bande." So I think what he's saying here is that when you connect with God, you might not realize it, but God is in a person who's right next to you in humanity. And that's what you should keep in mind. To bring everything together, I think that Varshneys' ideas of inter-ethnic community networks are important. But in our context, there are different ways we can do it. We can do it by using the BENE Israel community in India. We can do it using the CHABAD networks. We can use groups like Kulanu and others. We can do it out here in the diaspora. All of us can wage war, can address this issue of anti-Semitism. And I'll end with this YouTube of Kabir's verses.
On my first LSAT, I scored a 148. I ended up with a 174 and a Harvard Law degree. My experience as a student...
Sorry about that. Okay, so I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Viswanath, for this most insightful lecture. Now, if I have your permission, shall we open the floor for questions?
Sure.
Thank you. So I'll help you locate the questions. There are some questions that have been posted in the chat box, which you can also see. And I'll just scroll down to see the questions that we have received. Okay, there is a question. Many Muslims today, in their opposition to Hindutva and the BJP, are appropriating Holocaust terminology to describe the situation. For example, they compare the treatment by the BJP to that of Jews by the Nazis. How does this relate to concepts of anti-Semitism in India?
Okay, so I think that's a good question. I mean, as I said before, this is something that is part of how Hindus and Muslims and Jews relate to each other in India. This notion in modern times, in the last 10, 20 years, that somehow Hindus and sorry, I misunderstood the question. Yeah, so Muslims are saying that they've been treated by the BJP in the same way that Nazis treated the Jews. This is actually interesting. Now that I read the question, I have not come across this, but this is interesting. So my reaction would be the following. This seems to be something that could bring Jews and Hindus together, but I would reject that. I would say that this is similar to the counter trope that people of Hindutva are saying, that is, there's something that is similar between Jews and Hindus. They claim that the Hindus in India were mistreated by Muslims, just as the Jews were mistreated in Europe. And therefore they say India and Israel should stick together, Jews and Hindus should stick together. I think this whole idea of saying, we should stick together because we have a common enemy, that is only going to promote hate. I think it's much better to say, what do we have in common that's positive? And that, I think, would be a much better way of addressing anti-Semitism.
Okay, we have another question. Could one influence group be the Israeli embassy or consulate to present a positive Jewish-Israeli image and reality, or other similar groups, such as Israeli Indian institutes, for example?
Yeah, sure. I think all of these groups are able to do that. I'm not sure about the Israeli embassy or the Israeli consulate. I think that they might be, because of this atmosphere of mistrust that already exists, I have a feeling that anything that comes from the Israeli embassy might not be seen in a positive light. I'm not saying, that there should be nothing there. I mean, there are lots of people who don't necessarily come in with preconceived notions. So, the Israeli consulate, Israeli embassy could do something, could host events. But I think that the message is going to be a lot stronger if it comes from other people who are not perceived as having secondary agendas.
We have a couple of hands from the audience who wish to ask questions. So may I request them to hold on just for a couple of minutes more so that I can get to the questions that have already been posted in the comment box. There is one question that says that, isn't it true that the Jewish concept of chosenness is not a supremacist notion and never has been. It is about having a special responsibility and accountability in the world, both to God and to humanity. It was never expressed by force, by subjugation of others. So why was it feared by others?
Okay, I don't think the situation is as simple as that. So the question is talking about the notion of chosenness, in Hebrew Am HaNivchar. And I've written about this as well. Unfortunately, there are many groups who in fact do interpret this notion of chosenness, this doctrine of chosenness, that the Jews are a special people, in a negative way. There are groups like that. But I agree with the questioner that there is no reason for it to be interpreted in that way at all. In fact, recently, last year, there was a volume put out by Alon Goshen Goldstein in Israel called Judaism's Challenge, Election, Divine Love, and Human Enmity. And there, the people who write there, and probably other people like the questioner see the notion of chosenness in a different way. It is possible, and I refer to that in my talk as well, it is possible to see this chosenness as something that gives Jews a responsibility to act in a certain fashion. I would go even beyond that. I would say that to a certain extent, all groups have this notion of chosenness. You know, every one of us that belongs to a group is proud, I hope, of being a part of that group. And part of that feeling of pride is a feeling that you are chosen, your group is chosen, that you have something special to offer. So I think that all groups should act in this fashion. All groups, including Jews, should see themselves as having an obligation to do positive things so that other people, by looking at them, will emulate their example and act in a positive fashion. That's what I would say.
Okay, then there is this question, as desperate as the Islam of Wahhabi in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Indonesia, rabid anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism tie them. Why? How do we explain the fallacy asserted that one can say unconvincingly that one isn't anti-Semitic while being anti-Zionist?
Yeah. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to answer the question. That's a very, very broad question. But I think what the question is pointing out is that there are all kinds of people in the Muslim camp, or people interpret Islam in all sorts of different ways. And the same thing with Judaism as well. We don't necessarily have to accept a particular form of Judaism or of Islam. And we don't, in defending Judaism or in defending Islam, we don't need to feel that we are obliged to defend every variety of Islam there is, or every variety of Judaism there is, or every variety of Hinduism there is. I believe that it is possible to interpret all these religions, certainly Islam, Hinduism, and Judaism, in a humanist, in a universal sense. And I also believe that that interpretation is actually, in many ways, a true interpretation of those philosophies and of those theologies. And I think that's what we should focus on.
Okay. May I request Mr. Guberman to kindly unmute Matana Ramati, who wants to ask some question. She wants to ask the question directly. Yes. Ms. Ramati, please go ahead. Please go ahead with your question. You have been unmuted. Okay. I'm not sure if she is able to hear us. May I request Reena David to be unmuted so that she could ask her question?
Thank you, Dr. Navras Aafreedi, for giving me an opportunity. I don't have a very big question, but as I was listening, and it's good morning for Dr. Viswanath also, and
Morning.
It's good evening here. And we have a couple of thoughts exchanged. So a few times I have interacted, and I understand his concern, and where he was mentioning about the BENE group, and I'm the one who is representing a group in central India. Now, my question is like, yes, we are discussing, we have the concern for the cultural exchange. And yes, I agree in India, especially about people are not aware about Judaism much. Yeah, through YouTube, they come to know many things, but still they are not aware about it. And we have the CHABAD house, one of the CHABAD house in Delhi. I'm very much closely associated with that family also. I know them personally. Yes, but they are exclusively in their group. They are not allowing, I would not say allowing, the cultural exchange or that is not happening in a vast area. And what I feel is that BENE group can be a link between the other communities and the Judaism. Okay, we can, I feel we are an extension for them. And it will be very easy for us to carry the message of humanity, as you were mentioning, that the connection, if I want to have a connection with God, first I need to get connected with every human being. Yes, in spite of having their own culture, but at least for humanity, we don't have any particular, humanity itself is a religion. So now I request Dr. Viswanathan and your team to come up with certain, plan of action, because I feel that seeing the scenarios, what is happening present state, we are running short of time now. We have to be quick and doing some things. So
I agree with you, Reena. I agree with you that something needs to be done, and I agree that BENE in India and elsewhere have a part to play. My part is putting forward these ideas. Unfortunately, I'm not an organizer, but I do think that the larger groups have a responsibility to help the smaller groups participate in this work. So ISGAP, one of the things it's doing is the seminar series, but I think it is important, and I'm not sure that CHABAD is the right group for this, but I think some larger group, maybe Kulanu is doing tremendous work in other areas. So perhaps some of these groups could help BENE groups form, core institutions that would then take this on as part of their work. But I think the groups themselves could make a start. Once you make a start and say, okay, this is also going to be part of what we are going to do, you could give talks. I know that there are a lot of groups who are looking for people to come and speak, particularly in this COVID times. And once you have a group already going, then maybe you could approach, maybe ISGAP, I don't know, exactly what ISGAP might be able to do, but there are other groups that are able to provide some kind of funding or maybe other resources to enable you to continue in this work.
Could we please unmute Dr. Chittibabu Padavle?
Muted. Can you hear me, Professor Aafreedi?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly. Please go ahead with your question.
A question to Professor Viswanath and also to Professor Aafreedi, if you could also intervene. To bring the discussion back to the definitional issues, not just the actions related to combating anti-Semitism. All anti-Semitism has to, at a basic banal level, has to depend on ignorance, or in your words, innocence. So if any definition, yes, a subspecies of anti-Semitism you are proposing is useful in bringing more specificity to the debate. But at the same time, the definition that begins with innocence well into its name has the risk of making it immune from the beginning. So no anti-Semitism is completely conforms to the objective truths or history or anything. It has to, at some level, depend upon distortion or ignorance or incomplete details. So if you can make a case for innocence of anti-Semitism, I think we need much more robust definition of it.
Yeah.
And also you considered implicitly, at least, that there are influential, there are some of this anti-Semitism is also influenced by a certain vested interests and stuff like that. So I would like to, both of you, if you could respond.
Well, yeah. First of all, I would say I'm not suggesting, that we now start talking about anti-Semitism only in terms of innocence. It was only meant to be a title of my talk to focus upon the particular solutions that I am suggesting. I think there are two elements. The element that I was focusing on, well, I'm focusing on both elements actually simultaneously. The first thing I was saying was, in fact, something that I quoted Professor Aafreedi as saying, that is to say, you need to dispel ignorance. And I talked about that. Each one of us in our interactions with other individuals can do that. We can give talks, all these sorts of things. But the other thing that we can do is to form groups or take the groups that we already have and bring people from these other communities that might have anti-Semitic ideas or tendencies and bring them into our groups, or form super groups that cut across our existing groups, or bring our groups together so that we do have shared interests. So in India, there is a shared interest for ordinary people in not having violence. I mean, most of us, wherever we live, violence is a break in our lives. It causes danger and harm to all of us. We don't really want violence. So if we could build on that, we also want to feel good about ourselves. And I think feeling hate towards somebody also creates a kind of poison within yourself that eats up yourself, right? So even if we might not enunciate it that way, I think we also have an interest in feeling good about other people as well. So I think these kinds of inter-ethnic groups coming together will explicitly and implicitly, or should explicitly and implicitly work towards these shared interests. So that's what I would say. So the thing about innocence, I'm not suggesting that we now use that as a byword. I'm saying that is something to keep in mind as we seek solutions.
We have already run out of time. Our session was supposed to end 3 minutes before, but just to accommodate one more question, we shall extend our session by a couple of minutes more. And now if we could just unmute Ms. Matana Ramati, who has been waiting for very long, to say what she wanted to say. Mr. Guberman, could you just unmute her? Yes, she has been unmuted. Could you please go ahead with your question or comment? We still can't hear you.
If you want to add it to the chat, we'd be happy to
Yeah.
take the
Why don't you
written
ask the question
submission.
in the chat, Mr. Ramati?
Yeah, as Ramati has written, the UAE is a great example of how we can be in peace and accept each other. Would you like to comment on this, Professor Viswanath?
I'm not sure what particular aspect about it that she wants me to comment on, but yeah, I think, you know, all countries can help in this. I don't have anything particular to say about the UAE. I would much prefer that these sorts of things happen in places where there are more Jews. I would love for more work to be done in Palestine, in other communities that are affected on a daily basis by this conflict between Jews and Muslims.
Thanks a lot, Professor Viswanath, for answering the questions and for your most insightful lecture. Thanks to everybody who joined us for today's session. My apologies to Dr. Chitababu for my inability to answer your question because of the paucity of time, perhaps some other time. I'm always there at your service. Now I'll hand over the reins to my colleague, Mr. Guberman, to say the closing words. But before I do so, I would like to remind you of our session next week, next Thursday, same time, when we would have Mr. Fawad Javed speaking to us on anti-Semitism in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So please do not forget to register for that webinar as well. Over to Mr. Guberman.
Yeah, I'd like to extend my thanks to Dr. Aafreedi for convening today's session and Professor Viswanath for a really excellent lecture that did an excellent job highlighting the really diversity that we're all dealing with, not just in South Asia, but in all of our seminar series on anti-Semitism and comparative perspective. Once again, our South Asia seminars take place every Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please do make note of daylight savings time, which is in effect in the United States and Canada, but other time zones will have to adjust as necessary for next week's session. And we'll also have seminars in our other seminar series on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday next week at 11 a.m. Eastern. You can learn more at our website, isgap.org, isgap.org. Thanks again, everyone. Take care.